right, so next up is our very own Alex Hyde. Woohoo! Bio. Do I need to give a bio, or are you going to include that in your slides?
I'll briefly do it.
All right, he's going to take care of it. All right, you guys ready? All right, I've held up as long as I can. Now, do you want to hold this, or do you want me to just point it at you?
Pointing is fine.
Point and shoot.
That's fine.
There you go.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just hold it. Great. Thank you for coming out. And this talk is All Your Base Are Belong to Everyone, Vectors of Enterprise Cyber Risk. And just a bit about myself. My name is Alex Hyde. I'm one of the co-founders of HackMiami, a co-organizer along with Rod, James, and Proxy. And I'm also the Chief Research Officer of Security Scorecard, which is a cybersecurity company out of New York City that specializes in third-party vendor risk management. And essentially what we do is we scan the entire internet on a constant basis, looking for all types of different indicators of compromise and indicators of vulnerability. And we'll go into a bit about what some of the more interesting things that we've found within this last year, and also where we see a lot of the actual real attacks coming in and where the real vectors of risk are. And a lot of this has to do with because there's been a shift in the paradigm as to how information security is modeled overall. So before you had the fortress model where everyone pretty much knew what was inside their network. They had a good understanding of the controls in place for their network. Users had to be authenticated, provisioned, and everything that was inside the perimeter walls was considered safe. However, in today's era, it's moved into the ecosystem. So with the ecosystem, employees are empowered with the ability to make use of any type of solution that will get the job done. So you end up having all sorts of different third-party vectors of risk. You have all sorts of different shared credentials, credential reuse, OAuth type implementations, and this creates all these new access vectors that previously didn't exist, but are essentially just now part of doing business in the modern era. And this is essentially where the problem of the third party comes in. So you have the CEO or the CTO saying, let's move our critical solutions to the cloud. The cloud provider says, use our cloud service, and that leaves the security department screeching audibly and unable to, essentially any breach that now comes from this is reflected onto them. And essentially the top vectors of risk that we're looking at is our web application vulnerabilities, network misconfigurations. We're tracking all leaked credentials that we're able to find from the circulating databases, and we'll be going into those. The social engineering exploitation that comes along with database breaches. We're also tracking malware infections through various SYNCL methodologies, and we also see a lot of different types of legacy systems that are eventually end up being a lot of times being the point of access into a network. Oftentimes they're forgotten about, and the people tasked with running them didn't even know they were there. So just a bit about kind of the underground ecosystem as to how I break it down and what I do. So essentially you've got these four main realms that overlap, but sometimes they overlap more than others. And that's essentially the advanced persistent threat or the state-sponsored actor. And then you've got the organized crime groups. And then you have the script kiddie groups and the spammer groups. And they all overlap somewhat. You'll have organized crime overlapping with advanced persistent threats. Script kiddies, it now overlaps with APTs even more than ever before because of breaches like the Equation Group, and script kiddies have now been empowered with these types of advanced persistent attack frameworks. Same with organized crime, with leaking all these different malware kits into the public. So now script kiddies have access to both APT tools and organized crime tools. And then you have spammers, which essentially just make use of a lot of these tools and techniques to generate revenue quickly. They're often not really interested in state-sponsored stuff or true organized crime, but oftentimes they will lend their services to it because spammers oftentimes double as phishers. And probably the most prolific attack, or the prolific types of attacks that we've seen going through the last 2 years, specifically 2016 and 2017, are leaking databases or hacked databases. And there's a great resource, haveibeenpwned.com, who's run by a researcher named Troy Hunt out of Australia. And he has connections within the hacking underground and within the research community. And he will acquire gigabytes and gigabytes of leaked databases on a daily basis, and he'll ingest them into his platform, and it can be queried based on email address. And we also do this at Security Scorecard, but this is his sole focus on, and what he, that's all he does, and he collects a lot of data breaches. And pretty much every company you can think of that's been prominent within the last 10, 20 years have now been breached. Just on this first page, you've got Adobe, MySpace, LinkedIn, Last.fm, Badu, Mate1, every dating site you can imagine, a bunch of news sites, game sites, adult sites, social network sites, and it just goes on and on and on. Every day there's more and more. And it was 2.5 billion credentials by the end of 2016, and we're not even through 2017 yet, and there's already been about 2.5 billion to 3 billion more. And what attackers will do is they'll essentially, there's a bunch of different ways to make use of these databases. Oftentimes, they're email address and password combinations. And sometimes the passwords are encrypted, sometimes the passwords are plain text. But there's many different ways that attackers can make use of that, and we'll go into these. So just the basic flow of the underground economy. You obtain the stolen data, you monetize the stolen data, either you resell it or use it. You launder the profits via e-currencies, which is now made much simpler through the use of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. And then you spend or cash those out to physical assets or hold them as crypto. But essentially the goal is to cash them out into a physical way in the tangible real world. And the standard hacking methodology applies to this: reconnaissance, gaining access, maintaining access, and covering up the tracks. 4 very simple steps that have all sorts of different combinations to be leveraged, and is essentially the what's causing a lot of these breaches is the use of the methodology. And attack tools are now much easier. So with this image here, it shows that back in the day, hackers would have to really develop their code. They'd have to know how to code stuff and actually launch attacks. Now, the average botnet operator, you can launch attacks from just by downloading the latest attack kits, be it a botnet, or now we've seen advanced persistent threat tools like the Equation Group. So this is essentially what happens when missiles are given to script kiddies. This is a scan result of I scanned the entire internet, and this is just a screenshot of that, of all the infected SMB ports, port 445, that are actively infected with the double pulsar backdoor. And what the double pulsar backdoor is it's a piece of malware that was developed by the NSA and leaked into the public through the Equation Group toolkit. And the exploit pathway that they use is within the Equation Group toolkit, they'll use Eternal Blue to exploit the SMB protocol. They'll use double pulsar to backdoor it. And then once it's backdoored, the attackers can push out any payload they wish to use. And we saw that they pushed out WannaCry as ransomware because that was one of the quickest, easiest things to do. We've also seen Bitcoin mining being pushed out to these as well. When an IP address is infected with double pulsar, it's essentially two to three commands away from being able to execute arbitrary commands. Those are all essentially just administrative access, execute arbitrary commands. On those, you can instantly spin up botnets, and it's quite dangerous. And what we did is this is the way you want, if you want to see all the double pulsar infections that are currently online. I used ZMAP. You can also use MassScan, but ZMAP is quicker. So you just scan the whole internet for port 445. You have to answer a bunch of tickets from your hosting provider saying, why are you scanning the internet for 445? And if you can avoid getting shut down before the cycle completes, you could get some nice results. So just take care and just be transparent with the fact that you're doing research. And oftentimes if you're not causing performance issues to their servers, they'll let you finish your scans. And then take the results and run them through your checker of choice. Now, Nmap has made it very easy. They have a double pulsar NSC scanner that you can just implement with Nmap NSCs, or you can grab the Python script from GitHub developed by Countercept. And it's just load up a list of IP addresses, and the way it detects is it'll connect to port 445 or port 3389 for an RDP version. And based on the response, an infected IP address will beacon a response that's has a signature that matches the equation group. It's not the default response. It's a known infection signature. So there's a way to see all these essentially externally visible double pulsar infections onto the public internet with those steps. And when we ran through this, this is what we found. So this scan took place on 5/13, which was the Saturday. This took place started Friday afternoon and ended Saturday morning. We discovered that there are about 3.6 million publicly accessible SMB servers online. And when we mapped them out, 9,967 of them were actively infected with double pulsar, which was about 0.26% of every single SMB service online. And that had significantly dipped from the week before, where our results showed that there was about 3% total infection, and there was around 300,000 total infections. And we took the IP addresses after we were done mapping them, and then ran them against the IP attribution algorithm that we developed at Security Scorecard. Now, what the IP attribution function does is it will attempt to identify who owns an IP address, even when it falls outside their CEDAR range. So if Bank of America is making use of Rackspace or Linode or Amazon, AWS, through a bunch of different indicators, reverse DNS, SSL certificates, a bunch of different things we'll check for, we can determine who's running it. So the top three are telecommunications, technology, and information services. Those are essentially ISPs, telcos, unattributed IP addresses. And then everything below that, those are the industries that we saw that were actively attributed and infected with double pulsar. So some of the more interesting ones, we see pharmaceutical, we see healthcare, we see financial. Basically, it was hit across the board. No one escaped this. And the reason was because these are advanced tools that have just been given out to the public, and and malicious actors are responding accordingly. And before that, when you don't have these open seasons and and you can just attack things at scale like this, normally an attacker will make use of a single attack vector, something like a web application attack, traditional malware infection where they'll leverage stolen credentials, and they'll obtain databases through things like SQL injection, just the ability to pull information through vulnerabilities in the web app or execute codes on the web app. And this is also becoming more and more common, just leaking stuff on GitHub and other code-based repositories. Oftentimes developers, they'll accidentally commit code to a public repository that they don't intend to commit to a public repository, or the corporate repository will have some public sections that they didn't intend, and things like this will happen. This is a leaking database configuration file that has the API keys and the MySQL database password. There's a breach that Uber had about 2 years ago where they had some developer configurations leak onto GitHub that exposed a database with all the driver's license numbers that they had stored in it. And this is becoming more and more common, which is surprising. So as these security technologies are advancing and it's becoming more and more difficult to execute things like SQL injection commands, remote code executions, that's not really necessary when you've got all these circulating databases that have everyone's email and password combination, and plus leaking code bases of all these leaking emails and of all these different password combinations. People are known to reuse passwords, and there's always going to be a level of crossover. And that being said, there's been more and more rise of attacks taking place just because there's no password in place. Elasticsearch databases, Mongo databases, a lot of these massive breaches are being made public because the database administrators just left no password on the service. It was a publicly accessible IP address. You just connect into it, and now you've got access to all the information in the database. That's where the majority of these are coming from, surprisingly enough. And we'll go into details kind of what that looks like. So here's an example of something that was posted on BuzzFeed of all places. It was a Saks Fifth Avenue breach. They had a .json file that was just publicly accessible and had email addresses, phone numbers, and other IP addresses of people would subscribe to their newsletter. It was just publicly accessible. It was due to the poor configurations, and it was found because someone did a Google dork for it, which is essentially leveraging a search engine to find things that aren't generally intended to be indexed by a search engine. And then you have also deliberate type of leaks, things like the Volt 7 that came out of WikiLeaks and the Equation Group, which came from the shadow brokers, either pissed off insiders or the malevolent outsiders who are making this previously confidential information now public. And once the databases are made public, this is essentially the life cycle they go through. So eventually they are made public and everyone can get a copy of them, things like Adobe and LinkedIn and Dropbox. But for a period of time before they enter that public realm, they exist on darknet crypto markets like this sometimes. This is a darknet crypto market called the Targeted Executives Disclosures Marketplace. And this is an invite-only darknet where in order to even log in or join, you have to have 2 invites and be able to put around $250,000 of Bitcoin in escrow just to show that you're serious and willing to do business on the site. And if we look at some of the stuff that they have available, it says American Eagle Outfitters breach, internal Pittsburgh CNC provides access to all American Eagle's pretty much everything, access to 57 million credit cards. The next one is a Vodafone breach, includes full dumps of SharePoint.Vodafone.com. Goldman Sachs HR dump, bidding starts at $100,000. LinkedIn disclosures on 15 executives, intermittent email access, bidding starts at $55,000. And that's the stuff that they just put on the front page. And then once you log in, you can actually start bidding on these and getting access to these databases. And so for a period of time when they're very fresh and they're valuable and they can be leveraged for monetized crime, they will exist in this realm and they're essentially very rare and they will go for high amounts of money. And then after a while, after the data has been beaten to death and it's no longer as useful to an attacker, sort of like fresh fruit going bad, it'll end up on places like leak forums or hack forums or any of these other clearnet hacking places, which are essentially frequented by a lot of script kiddies. But they'll trade stuff like this because it gives them reputation, and they get status within the forum and advantages like that. And so we see here that there's a bunch of hacked RDP accounts, hacked SOX 5s, combos of databases, emails, and passwords. These are always free on these clearnet sites. If someone's trying to pay for them, then you're just on the wrong forum. And they usually go for when their data is fresh, it'll go for a very high ticket value, like we saw on the targeted executive forums. And then once it hits here, it's essentially the public. And then the next step from here, and this is someone, it says 1,042 public and private database dumps. So this person's just got a big archive of databases that they're making available for free on the leak forums site. And then you have places like this, which are essentially just, they're like Have I Been Pwned, in that they compile all the different databases, except they're not as, they don't have the same ethics as a white hat researcher, and they make all the databases available for download for free. And these type of sites go up and down all the time. And these are, just for example, we have the Stratfor email breach, the Dropbox email breach, United Arab Emirates Investment Bank, Badu, LinkedIn, Muslim Match, Nold forums, well, a whole bunch of Snapchat databases in there. And you end up, these servers usually have terabytes and terabytes of stuff, and people will mirror them with wget and host them up until they're taken down. And essentially people will just start collecting these through like trading cards. And the way to find these is to just, once you find the file name, you can do a Google Dork for the file name, in title, index of, and then the database name, and you'll find what you're looking for. And usually when you find one, you'll find a whole lot of others. And so what are attackers doing with these databases? So the main thing is password reuse. They've got lists of long email address and email password combinations, and there's going to be a percentage of people that will reuse those passwords. So on the LinkedIn, say for the LinkedIn breach, you can take all of the Bank of America login accounts, and then there might be 20,000 different login portals available for Bank of America for various different services. Chances are there's going to be employees with their corporate credentials that are reusing it they're reusing passwords across the board, and that's more and more common. And once the goal is to get access to the enterprise to enterprise stuff, but they're also looking for things such as simple as Spotify accounts, Netflix logins, just premium services, stuff they can do a little bit of carding or just watch stuff for free. So there's a whole range of severity of how these databases are being used. Some people are just sending spam email. Some people are sending targeted spear phishing email. And we saw that with the DocuSign breach that just took place. There's a whole bunch of targeted spear phishing attacks that just came out within the last week as following the DocuSign breach. And it'll probably be about 3 months before we start seeing DocuSign in the same types of places that we saw these other public forums. And right now it seems that the only people who have DocuSign it's circulating in private circles, but give it time, it'll join the list of publicly available databases as well. Chances are Have I Been Pwned already has it. And then there's the aspect of password cracking. So when these databases are circulating, oftentimes it'll have the email address and password, but the password is more often than not encrypted. So attackers will have to decrypt it or find another database that has plain text passwords. But cracking passwords is not difficult. You got John the Ripper, you got Hashcat, people with Bitcoin mining rigs have a bunch of GPU cards that can also double as password cracking cards. And it's pretty simple to just load up password hashes and crack them. So what we did here is I loaded up the FBI.gov passwords from the Dropbox breach and ran them against the default John the Ripper word list of the top 100 most common passwords. And it found the simple ones: Godzilla, ha ha ha, tennis, Trevor. A more advanced word list and more time, more processing power is going to get more results. And this is if an attacker wants to do it the hard way. So hackers there's specifically the exploit.in forum. They made a nice 10 gigabyte combo list file where they took all the most popular data breaches that have been circulating for the last few years, all the ones you've been looking at, and they've already pre-cracked the passwords, and it's just on Pirate Bay, a 10 gigabyte file called the exploit.in password forum, password breach archive, and it's plain text email and password, email addresses and plain text passwords for all these different breaches. And it's recommended that you all download it and see if your email is on there. Probably something will be. And it's just also interesting to look at and see how this is being done. And that release was about a year ago now, and there have been more updated versions that have since come out. And it's actually been seen in the wild. So this is a U.S. CERT alert that was just released within the last month. And threat actors appear to be leveraging stolen administrative credentials across all enterprise network access devices in all enterprise industries. And this comes on the heels of the release of the Equation Group breach, or the Equation Group attack tools, and basically everyone's email and password combination going back for the last 10 years. And even when you think of it from the standpoint of these databases being available, in 2008, 2010, the only people who had access to all these different databases were groups like the NSA, who would use it for lookups and stuff. So you've got all of that available now too, from just a passive intelligence lookup perspective, and now you have all the active attack tools available as well. So you've got basically anyone can have the NSA of 2008 on their laptops now with two Git clone commands, and we're seeing the results of that and what happens when everyone has access to these types of attack toolkits and uses them unscrupulously. And here's a very basic example of a PayPal account checker. This is just some PHP code. You can Google dork for these. Oftentimes they're just hosted on throwaway websites. And what attackers do is they'll post in combo lists of email and passwords. So they'll take a handful from that exploit.in collection I was telling you about, paste it in there, and just click check. And it'll attempt to log in through PayPal. It'll attempt to log into PayPal for each of those email addresses and passwords. And the ones it can get in, it'll tell you which ones are alive, and then you can start stealing the money or making use of the PayPal account. And it's always going to be a matter of percentage. If you've got the bigger the database, the fresher the breach, the more hits you're going to get of people who have been reusing. And here's an example of a very old, kind of clunky yet effective password attack tool. This comes with Kali Linux. It's called THC Hydra. Nothing really that impressive about it, but you can give it a list of email. It's essentially a password checking tool. You can give it a list of username and password combinations or email and password combinations and a list of targets, and it'll just beat through them until it goes through and tells you which ones are active and which ones are not. People who are more prone to coding, they could easily probably write something in Python or even curl that kind of achieves the same objective, but this is just something out of the box that comes with Kali already. And so once they've gotten valid credentials, so think about it like you've got these databases circulating, and they're just raw pieces of wood, and the hackers carve them up to find valid, good logins and stuff. What do they do with them? So they can either start using them themselves or they can start reselling them. So this is a credential marketplace. It's called cartersmarket.su. It used to just be credit cards for sale, but now they sell PayPal logins, email logins, e-commerce logins, and the artwork kind of gives you an idea of the type of personalities that participate in the shop. And here's an example of what's actually logged in. So yeah, they're selling credit cards and dumps, so they're selling credit card data for online fraud, dumps for in-store swipes, PayPal accounts. They got fake scans for passports and driver's license, stuff like that. And also bank accounts are also sold. Bank accounts usually sell for about 10% of the balance. So if you've got $1,000 in the account, they'll sell it for $100. If you got 10 grand in there, they'll sell it for 1,000. And then we also now kind of taking this back a bit to the concept of extortion and ransoms. So ransomware has been a trending topic over the last week because of the WannaCry stuff, but we've observed ransomware attacks hitting open database services, specifically MongoSearch and Elasticsearch. So if you want to be able to discover all of the open Elasticsearch databases on the internet, again, a ZMAP scan of port 9200 will show you all the open ones, and then you can do a banner grab with mass scan on all those results and look for any port 9200 that's giving back a JSON response. Once you've done that, you've got a list of open Elasticsearch databases, because no Elasticsearch database will give you back a JSON response if it's properly configured. And so what we did at Scorecards, we probably found around 600,000 open Elasticsearch databases that we've mapped out to companies and then tracked. And what we found is on both Elasticsearch and Mongo databases, when they weren't secured, oftentimes within a few days of the database going online, the database would be dropped, and this message would be left in a table called urgent warning, and please read. And it says, don't panic, your database is in the safety and backed up. To restore, send 0.05 Bitcoin with your email to our server's IP or domain name. Each 48 hours will erase all data. And I've also seen threats where they threaten to release the data unless it's been published. And when you check the Bitcoin payments, some people are paying. More people, they made more money than the guys in the WannaCry campaign did. These guys probably made around 60K. But a lot of people, they'll just restore the database and ignore the ransom message, and then it'll get dropped again, and then they just restore it again. But they just never think to just set a password. That's really the entire issue. They're not putting a password on their databases, and it's because the technology is new and it doesn't do it by default. And they say, oh, you're not supposed to put this on the internet. It's going to be behind a VPN. It's going to be behind a firewall, but they're not. And this is the results of it. And we've seen my last check showed about 600,000 open Elasticsearch databases on the entire internet, and about 250,000 open Mongo databases. And Mongo would be a sweep on port 27017, and Elastic would be 9200. And any of the search engines like Shodan or Census will give you those same results. And it's essentially what is feeding the underground marketplace right now. The fact that people are just giving away their data because they don't know how to set their servers up right. And so, in conclusion, what can be done? So there's all the different interconnected networks have provided different levels of risk. The third parties have, everyone's making use of various third parties of a gradient level of different security. And now script kiddies have military-grade cyber weapons, and organized crimes have dark markets for every cool thing you could possibly think of. And the only thing that can be really done is essentially it's a continuous monitoring of yourself and the entire ecosystem that you're involved in, and it's quite difficult to do for an individual to do it. I mean, that's what the reason we security scorecards to create a SaaS-based platform where companies can just input a URL and monitor all the different companies that they're following. But a person can essentially do that. They can do that themselves in a lot of ways for smaller shops, because if you know that you're making use of Amazon, if you know that you're making use of Vodafone, and you know what IP addresses you're using, you can basically craft up some Nmap scripts to check those things for these. In fact, there's already existing Nmap scripts to look for null authentication. Just very basic tools like Nmap scans, or just searches on Pastebin every now and then, or searches on GitHub for your own company name. That'll go a long way to see if either you're leaking something or maybe there's another company that's leaking something. Because the bad guys they're not doing anything special a lot of the time. They're just mapping, seeing what's out there, and hitting the very first thing that they're seeing. And most importantly, everyone's going to have a breach at this point in time. Like, there's no way that anyone's going to be, I am king of security, no one's ever going to hit me, because they're going to be doing business with someone that they're trading sensitive information with who will get hit. And it's what differentiates winners from the losers is how fast do you respond to that incident. Do you notify your users right away, tell them to start changing their passwords and say, we got hit, we fixed it, we'll make sure we don't get hit in that way again? Or do you ignore it for 4 years until it comes up in a mergers and acquisition deal, like what we saw what happened with Yahoo and Verizon? So that's essentially what's going to differentiate things. It's going to be the response to the incident. And here's a list of resources that are a lot of fun. You got Have I Been Pwned for email breach lookups. And if you want to find the sources for the databases that he uses on Have I Been Pwned, just do some creative Google searching with the database names. You'll find them. The Equation Group Leak Archive, available in full from GitHub. Recommend everyone check it out because there's all sorts of really interesting stuff in there. And then you got two options for an Nmap double pulsar scanner, or two options for double pulsar scanner. You can load the Nmap NSC into your local copy of Nmap, or you can just get the Python scripts and scan for it in that method. But those are probably the most useful tools of the month, I would say, especially given what's been going on. And on that, we have a few minutes left, and I'd be happy to take questions. And and also you can go to instant.securityscorecard.com and type the name of your company, and we'll generate an instant external report showing everything that we see from web application security to hacker chatter, leaking passwords, DNS configurations. We look at 10 different vectors of risk and roll it up into a color-coded letter grade. So instant.securityscorecard.com for that. And follow me on Twitter at Alex Hyde. And yeah, we got some time, so I'd be happy to take any questions. Any questions? All right. Great. Thank you all for coming. Much appreciated.